The G20 is the top table in the world that brings leaders together to talk about major issues. It's unlike the Security Council of the United Nations, which has some permanent members who exercise a veto. The G20 is an informal grouping of leaders. There is no veto. It's a collective examination and response to problems, and therefore it's a unique opportunity for middle countries to play a special role. If you look at the case of Canada and Australia in particular, there's some interesting parallels here that also bring out the possibilities and constraints. Canada, of course, chaired the G20 in 2010. At that time, Canada was able to lead on its view on how to respond to the global crisis at that time. The Toronto Summit was a point in time when there was a call to move towards fiscal consolidation. That was very much consistent with the Canadian agenda. It was also supported by the UK, by Germany, by the IMF at the time. The United States then wanted to talk about growth, but the United States, as a superpower, failed in that at that time. In retrospect, it turns out that that decision to turn was premature. It's always interesting to look with hindsight, but our growth forecasts at that time proved overly optimistic, and some countries should have continued to pursue fiscal expansion, something which is still being debated. But it shows how Canada did have an influence at that time. If you look at the case of Australia today, Australia has set for itself an objective of an agenda, a much narrower agenda focused on economic issues, and it has put a lot of effort into getting agreement on a set of structural reforms that will be announced tomorrow by each country, and which are designed to enhance global growth by 2% over the next 5 years. If that's successful, Australia will be remembered for that. The Brisbane Action Plan will be remembered for that. And again, it's an example of how a middle-income country can exercise leadership and can influence global events. As I said at the start, it's the top table. It's very important for Canada and Australia that G20 succeed. Canada, of course, was a member of the G7 before it was at the top table, but recognized that over time, the G7 could no longer continue to play that role. Australia was not a member of the G7 and saw the G20 as an opportunity for it to gain a seat. So if the G20 succeeds, Canada and Australia will continue to be able to play that role. If the G20 fails because it does not exercise the leadership for which people look to it, then a new group will inevitably form over time, and Canada and Australia may find themselves without a seat at that table. So it's critical. You can play a leadership role. We will see what happens over the next few years from that.